Okay, we're now going to talk about for loops within Python. So I'm going into this assuming that we understand how the while loops work and the whole conditional side of it, where we give it a boolean or a condition that equates to a boolean, and whether that equates to true is whether the code within the block runs. So moving on past while loops, we have for loops, which simplify iterating over lists and other iterable types of data. So to illustrate this, I'm going to first declare a list, and I'm going to call it my list, and in here I'm going to have apple, banana, and cherry. So we're now going to start our for loop by using the keyword for, and then we're going to pick a variable name that doesn't already exist. So I'm going to use the name fruit in my list. So what I'll do is I'm going to print fruit, and I'm going to run this code. And what we can see here is we're seeing apple, then banana, and then cherry, and they're all being printed one at a time, and that's what this function's doing here. So our for keyword is essentially saying for each item within this given list. So for each fruit in my list, print the fruit. So again, we have to use a variable name. Well, we don't have to, but we should use a variable name that doesn't already exist within our code, because we would overwrite it. So for fruit in my list is essentially saying we're going to go through this one at a time, and whatever this is, we're going to assign it to fruit. So hopefully that's clear. What is great about these loops are similar to a while loop, we have the ability to break out of it or continue. So to illustrate this, we'll do for fruit in my list, and I'm going to say if fruit equals banana, then I want to break. Otherwise, I want to print it. And when I run this, we'll see that we print apple, and then on the second pass, where we have banana as the value of fruit, this if statement is true, as banana is fruit. So this is a true statement, and we're now going to run this code, which is break, and this will break the for loop, which essentially means we're going to stop whatever we're doing, and we're just going to move on past this code. We're not going to do any further iterations. We're going to go back to executing as we were before. So that's why we immediately stop once banana is the current value of fruit. What we could do then instead is we can use continue. And as you should be aware, if you are familiar with while loops, this will skip only the current iteration, but not stop the loop entirely. So when I run this, we see apple and then cherry. And that's because the first run, we have apple, so fruit equals apple, which means that this is not true. So we're going to move on and print it. The second pass, so banana, so fruit is now equal to banana, which means this is true. And we are going to then use the continue statement to skip the remainder of the code. So we're going to ignore this. We're going to go right back to the beginning with the next value, which is cherry, which means that fruit isn't banana. Fruit equals cherry right now, so this isn't true. So we can print it. So hopefully that is nice and clear. And the final thing that we can do with for loops is we can use a range function as what we declare for in. So this is a little bit different. So we're going to get rid of our list entirely, and we're going to say for x in range, and we're going to say 0 and then 10. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to print x, and I'm going to run it, and we're just going to see what happens. So we've started by printing the integer 0, and then this is incremented one at a time, and it's been printed again, and then we've stopped when it equals 9, not because it equals 9, but because this was the 10th iteration. So if I hover over the range function and we look at the type hint, it returns an object that produces a sequence of integers from start, inclusive, to stop, exclusive, by step, which is the range. So what that means is this here is our start value. So this is our start point, and then the second one is our stop. So we're saying start at 0, end at 10, and that's why we are iterating 10 times. And then I'm using x as an abstract variable name, because what range does is it returns an integer. It returns a number based on the current iteration. So we're just assigning the number of the iteration to x and printing it out. And we can further expand what range does by adding a step. So if we're looking at the type hint again, so step, where does it mention it? Right at the end, if you look at the last sentence, when step is given, it specifies the increment or decrement. So if I put 2 here and I run it again, you'll see that every single loop, we're not going 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. We're counting up in increments of 2. So we're going 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And that is the use case of the steps function. But between all of these, we're able to run a section of code a certain number of times with very little input. Because the alternative would be if we wanted to use a while loop. So let's say I equals 0 while I is less than or equal to 10, print I, and then I plus equals 1. So as you can see there, these are kind of doing the same thing, or if I wanted to do that, now they should do the exact same thing. So if I run this, you'll see we go 0 through to 8, and then 0 through to 10, because I put 10 there, so that would need to be 8. There you go. But this is much less code, and it does the exact same thing, whereas this takes a bit more comprehension to understand. But this is very, very concise, and once you're familiar with and comfortable with using ranges, it streamlines the whole process of reading and understanding your own code there. So finally, I think I said finally before, but I'm going to say finally one more time. And this is just because we covered it when talking about while loops, is we can still support the else function. So loop has ended, and then run this. And the else function, similar to when you use it on an if statement or a while loop, whatever is here, this code will run immediately after the loop is finished. I think I mentioned this one talking about while loops, but just to make sure it's said again, there's a little bit of a nuanced use case, because this here does the exact same thing. As soon as the loop ends and it exits the loop, it's going to run whatever's the next piece of code anyway. So it's quite uncommon in my experience to see the else statement used with loops, but sometimes, and I think it's about context, where if there is something that happens immediately after the loop and it has to happen only after the loop, like it can't move, it needs to happen immediately after, using the else statement can just communicate that very clearly to other developers or yourself when you revisit the code in a few months and you need to refamiliarize yourself with what's happening. So it's all about what makes your life the easiest as a developer. So in my advice to you would be, only use the else statement if it is absolutely necessary that code runs immediately after the loop, which generally means that it should have some relation to what the loop is doing itself. And that's everything that I want to cover on for loops for today.